Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. This is a mini episode about the Georgia Senate runoff. I'm your host, Drew, and this one is a little bit personal to me because I do work in political media, and currently, at the company I work for, Ampersand, one of our clients is a PAC for Kelly Loeffler, Georgians for Kelly Loeffler, and that's the client I'm working with. So I wanted to do this one a little bit just to kind of touch you base on what is this Georgia runoff? Why is it getting so much media coverage? What makes it so important? And just kind of a little bit on my thoughts about the race and regarding the question of mobilization or persuasion, on how you view your electorate. Do you want to mobilize your base to beat the opponent, or do you want to try and persuade maybe independents or center right or center left leaning people that could be persuaded? And this conversation has gone on forever in elections, but I think it's particularly important and kind of changing in regards to how Democrats and Republicans are looking at Georgia. Let's just start off a little bit with the context of what happened. Now that we're a few weeks out of the 2020 election, we now know that states are certifying their election results. Litigation is kind of wrapping up. It's pretty safe to say that Joe Biden is the president. He's going to have a Democratic House of Representatives. But where the Democrats, in their view, failed is in changing the Senate. And currently, you have a 50 Republican and 48 Democrat Senate. And these two races in Georgia are kind of the ones that are in balance, right? So if you had both Democrats win in Georgia, you would have a 50-50 Senate split, and then any vote that would have that 50-50 split would then go to, the tiebreaker would go to the vice president, which is Kamala Harris, and that would go to the Democrats most likely. So, however, if the Republicans even just win one of these runoff seats, there's two going on in Georgia, if they win one, then they have a 51-49 Senate majority. Or if they win two, which is very likely, you would have a 52-48 Senate majority to the Republicans, which would pretty much be a major roadblock for anything Biden wanted to do. It would force more cooperation, perhaps maybe lead to more gridlock, and it could be a problem in Biden's view. And a very good thing if you're Mitch McConnell, who wants to stay the majority Republican Senate leader. So that is why this Georgia runoff is so important, because the balance of the Senate is actually at stake. And this is rare. Usually, Georgia is a pretty safe red state. And the runoff is almost always a shoo-in and is very rarely covered. And personally, for my business, usually we get a few clients for the Georgia runoff, and it's just a little, icing on the cake of the election year as far as our billing. But this year, it's actually a lot of work. And I think, based on what I'm seeing, and I'm allowed to disclose this because it's public knowledge now that the booking is public. Georgians for Kelly Loeffler booked $10 million in cable buys from now until January, which is unheard of in something like the Georgia runoff. Ossoff, Perdue, Warnock, they're all booking over $1 million a week just on cable ad buys. It's going to probably end up being the most expensive Senate race in American history. Oh, my lights just dimmed out. Spooky. It's going to be the most expensive Senate race in American history, and I've seen the spending personally, and it's caused me a lot of work actually. But that's why this is so interesting and fascinating. And so let's dive in. What makes this race so close? Why is it usually safe and not anymore? Well, we're looking at the polling, and it looks close. Now, let's remember, we had a discussion about polling where it was not exactly getting every person that was represented on the right wing. And so the polls were actually too far to the left and needed to adjust 3 points to the right. So we have to look at that with this polling. But what we saw was Georgia flipped blue in the presidential election because of mobilization on the Democratic side and a little bit of persuasion. Mostly mobilization in the areas of Atlanta and the suburbs around Atlanta. Democrats were able to get a high turnout for African American vote and urban vote, especially thanks to people like Stacey Abrams, among others, who really pushed hard to mobilize the Democratic base vote. People that maybe not even voted before, but had they vote, they would go Democrat. They voted this time. and that flips the state blue. Now, the question is, can the Democrats keep their mobilization and momentum going forward all the way through the runoff? Stacey Abrams has said recently, last week, that she says 750,000 people have asked for runoff ballots that haven't before, right? So this mobilization and momentum might be continuing, maybe. However, I still think that more likely is a lot of people wanted to vote Trump out and probably don't care as much about this Senate runoff. I mean, there's a lot of fatigue, a lot of political fatigue. So it's going to be difficult for Democrats to maintain the momentum in Georgia that they had over the Trump election, right? Because this is a different election. And the other problem is people weren't always voting down ticket. You had Republicans that were voting for Biden, not because they disliked Trump, but they were still voting red down ticket. And I still think that that's a lot of the persuasion that Democrats were able to do for the president, right? Persuade people to, hey, maybe Biden's a better call than Trump. That was a lot easier of a persuasion than flip everything of your party identity over to Democrat in your Senate seat. I think that's a hard sell. So as it stands here, you have Warnock and Loeffler. I'm looking at 270 to win. Their poll averages have, Warnock and Loeffler as a coin cost, 48.5 to 48.5. I would say account for a little shift to the right because of the polling errors we've seen for a couple elections now. I would say Loeffler's probably 2-3 points ahead. Warnock is going to need a big turnout, a big mobilization turnout, in my opinion, to take that one. Ossoff and Perdue, it looks like they have Ossoff at 47.5 and Perdue 49.5. This is a lot more similar to kind of where we expect to see the Democrat and Republican ratio. And again, I would add on another 1.5 or 2 to the Perdue. I think Perdue is going to take that one safely. So the way it stands, Republicans are looking good. But they have things to be worried about. They do have to be worried about Democrats and the effects of Stacey Abrams mobilizing Atlanta votes, suburban Atlanta votes, which lean heavy Democrat. And there's a new threat. The Trump wing of the Republican Party in Georgia still believes that this election was stolen, even though Georgia certified the results under a Republican Secretary of State who assured that it was safe. But this Trump wing of the Republican Party is now saying, we don't even want to, why, if it's rigged against us, why would we participate? And I don't know how much this will actually prevent people from mobilizing on the Republican side, but I would say it's a concern because the Trump wing of the Republican Party is very vocal. And they're talking about, boycotting this election if Georgia doesn't, uncertify their results or looking more into the steal, whatever they're calling for, which again, in my opinion, I think is ridiculous based on, again, a Republican Secretary of State certifying these results and ensuring that, Biden's the winner fair and square. There is this threat that these Trump people only wanted Trump. Now that Trump's not on the ticket, and especially since they're pissed off about this, what they view as a stolen election, they may not show up. So I think that this election, the runoff, is more about mobilization than it is persuasion. And there have been Democrats in Georgia in the past that have tried to run as more of a persuasion candidate, pro-gun. Hey, I'm in Georgia. I'm just like you, white guy, pro-gun, just a little bit Democrat. And it didn't work. Brian Kemp won against that. And I think that Stacey Abrams got close, still lost, but got close. But she got close because of mobilization and sticking to core base Democratic values of, pushing for lower cost health care or Medicare for all, public education, the works, right? Gun control even. And so I think the Democrats need to just mobilize. I think they do think less about persuasion and mobilize the same people that came out to vote for Biden in November. They need to do that again in January. I think as well as the Republicans need to mobilize because I think they've already persuaded some people that, hey, it was the people that voted for Biden and that won't again. Biden and Trump aren't on the ticket. I think those Republicans are still safe. Those middle right Republicans. I don't think they need to persuade them back from Biden because again, he's not on the ticket anymore. I think they need to mobilize. They need to mobilize the Republicans that they have. They need to mobilize these Trump people, because if they start losing Trump people for some whatever boycott, or they just give up the cult of personality, then Republicans might be in trouble. So again, I just wanted to touch on that. That's a main argument that's often found in political strategy, is persuasion versus mobilization. It's often a little bit of both, right? You could say that Biden mobilized certain votes in Detroit and Atlanta that won him those key states, but he also persuaded some center-right Republicans in Arizona and the suburbs around Pennsylvania, right? So it is a little bit of both. But I think that as a strategist, you kind of need to hone down what you want, because you don't want to be a jack of all trades and fail at all of them. As a strategist, you kind of need to hone down what do you want to achieve. And I think that the Stacey Abrams strategy, and the strategy that will work for Democrats, is mobilizing their base in the cities and suburbs around these heavy voting areas that are blue blocks that just don't have a lot of participation normally. We'll see what happens. The balance of the Senate is at stake. I still think, if I was a betting man, I think the Republicans will take at least one of these for sure, and maintain Senate control. However, if we see an upset in a 50-50 Senate, that would be a godsend for the Biden administration. They would not have the roadblock of Mitch McConnell, and depending on where you sit on the aisle, that could be a very good or bad thing. Regardless, this has been another mini episode of the Tonic Accord podcast, one that hits close home to me because I have to go back to working on my Kelly Loeffler client after this, and I hope you enjoyed.